Everything written in every history book about human civilization rests on one single date. 13,000 years, that is the number. That is the wall. That is when human beings supposedly first set foot on American soil, crossing a land bridge from Asia, arriving in a new world, beginning the story of this continent. Every archaeologist agreed. Every textbook confirmed it. Every museum in the world built its exhibits around that one number. And then, in a cave in Oregon, they pulled something out of the ground. It was 18,000 years old. Older than any human presence ever recorded on this continent. Older than the land bridge theory allows. Older than the story we were all told. No press conference, no announcement, no explanation. Just a discovery, sitting quietly in the pages of scientific journals, while the rest of the world moved on. Camera dips toward cave entrance. The cave is called Paisley Caves. It sits in the high desert of south-central Oregon, in Lake County, a remote, windswept landscape that most Americans have never seen and most scientists had largely ignored for decades. In 2008, archaeologist Dennis Jenkins from the University of Oregon led an excavation team into those caves. What they were looking for was simple: evidence of early human habitation. Fire pits, stone tools, animal bones. What they found instead was something that should not have been there. Buried deep in the sediment layers, 14 feet below the cave floor, they recovered ancient human DNA, not bones, not tools, coprolites. That is the scientific word for fossilized human feces. It sounds unremarkable until you look at the date. The human DNA in those samples was radiocarbon dated to 14,300 years ago. Some samples pushed even further, closer to 18,000 years in deeper sediment layers that were tested in subsequent studies. Let that number land for a moment. The accepted model of human arrival in the Americas, the Clovis First theory, places the earliest humans here at 13,000 years ago. The Paisley Caves evidence doesn't just challenge that model. It destroys the timeline by a margin of 5,000 years. And 5,000 years is not a rounding error. 5,000 years is the entire span of recorded human civilization. How did they get here? When did they come? And who exactly were they? Scientists still don't fully understand the answers. But the cave was just the beginning. When the genetic material from Paisley Caves was analyzed, researchers expected to find a clean match. Native American lineages are well documented. The haplogroups, the genetic family trees, are known. What they found matched, partially. The samples carried markers from haplogroup A and haplogroup B, both known Native American lineages, both consistent with Asian origin populations. That part fit the existing model. But here is where the story gets complicated. In 1996, 12 years before the Paisley Caves discovery, construction workers along the Columbia River in Washington state unearthed a skeleton that came to be known as Kennewick Man. Kennewick Man was approximately 9,000 years old, and his skull morphology, the shape of the bones, the facial structure, the cranial measurements, did not match modern Native American populations. It matched ancient populations from South Asia and Polynesia. The discovery triggered a legal battle that lasted 9 years. Native American tribes claimed ancestral rights to the remains. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers held the bones. Scientists fought in court for access. In 2004, a federal court ruled that scientists could study the skeleton. In 2015, nearly 2 decades after the discovery, DNA analysis was finally completed. The results showed that Kennewick Man was genetically related to modern Native Americans, but the skull shape remained unexplained. No living population shares those exact features. No one can explain exactly how a 9,000-year-old man in Washington state ended up with a skull that resembles no known American lineage. And when you combine Kennewick Man with the Paisley Caves DNA, a picture starts to emerge. One that suggests the Americas were not settled in a single migration, but in multiple waves, by multiple populations, arriving at different times, from different places. Ask yourself, if that is true, what happened to the ones who arrived first? For most of the 20th century, the Clovis culture held an almost religious status in American archaeology. Clovis people, named after a site in Clovis, New Mexico, where their distinctive stone tools were first identified in 1929, were considered the founding population of the Americas, the first Americans. Full stop. Their tools are unmistakable. Fluted stone spear points, crafted with extraordinary precision, found at sites across North and South America, always dating to around 13,000 years ago. And then, in 1997, a site in southern Chile called Monte Verde changed everything. Archaeologist Tom Dillehay had been excavating Monte Verde since 1976, for 2 decades. The archaeological establishment largely dismissed his findings. The dates were too old. The implications were too uncomfortable. In 1997, after a formal review by a team of independent experts, Monte Verde was officially accepted as a pre-Clovis site. The tools, the hearths, the wooden structures dated to 14,800 years ago, that is nearly 2,000 years before Clovis, and Monte Verde is in Chile, at the southernmost tip of South America. Think about what that means. For humans to reach southern Chile 14,800 years ago, walking from Alaska, they would have had to arrive in Alaska at least 20,000 years ago, maybe earlier. The math does not work with the land bridge model. So how did they get there? The coastal migration theory, that ancient peoples traveled by boat along the Pacific coastline, island hopping and fishing their way south, has gained serious traction since the Monte Verde discovery. It would explain Monte Verde. It would explain Paisley Caves. It would explain Kennewick Man. But it raises an even larger question. If ancient humans were crossing open ocean 20,000 years ago, where else did they go? And what did they leave behind? In 1992, archaeologist Richard Cerruti was overseeing routine work at a highway construction site in San Diego, California. Workers struck something unusual 30 feet below the surface. Cerruti stopped the machines and began excavating by hand. What he found was a mastodon, a prehistoric elephant-like creature that went extinct approximately 10,000 years ago. Its bones were broken in a very specific pattern, not by erosion, not by pressure. By human hands. The bones had been deliberately fractured using stone hammers, 5 of which were found at the site, still positioned exactly where they had been placed. The marrow had been extracted. The fracture patterns matched known methods of bone breaking used by early humans to access food and make tools. Cerruti dated the site and submitted his findings. The date came back at 130,000 years ago. 130,000 years. That is not a typo. That is not a measurement error. That is 10 times older than any accepted human presence in the Americas. The findings were published in the journal Nature in 2017. One of the most respected scientific publications on the planet. The paper had gone through years of peer review. The archaeological establishment did not accept it quietly. Critics argued that natural geological forces, earthquakes, rock falls, could produce the same bone fracture patterns. They argued that stone hammers found nearby could be naturally occurring rocks rather than tools. Supporters pointed out that the probability of 5 rounded stones naturally occurring in precise proximity to deliberately fractured mastodon bones in a pattern consistent with known human tool use is statistically near impossible. The debate is not settled. The site has not been excavated. Scientists still don't fully understand what happened at that California highway cut 130,000 years ago. But here is the question nobody in mainstream archaeology wants to answer. If humans were in California 130,000 years ago, where did they come from? And where did they go? In September 2021, a study published in the journal Science announced a discovery that immediately generated global headlines. At White Sands National Park in New Mexico, researchers had found fossilized human footprints. This was not unusual in itself. Footprints have been found at various ancient sites, but these footprints were embedded in sediment layers that dated to between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. 20-3,000 years ago, humans walked across New Mexico. At that time, according to every existing climate model, The entire northern land route from Asia to America was buried under a glacier. The ice sheet was impassable. The land bridge was frozen solid. There was no way for humans to walk from Asia to New Mexico 23,000 years ago. Using the land bridge route. None. The footprints are real. The dating has been independently verified. The sediment layers containing seeds from an aquatic plant called Ruppia serosa, which only grows in specific water conditions, confirmed the age through multiple independent tests. Over 60 individual footprints were found across multiple sediment layers, meaning these were not a single passing group. Humans repeatedly walked through this area over a period of thousands of years. Children's footprints, adult footprints, walking in different directions, living here, and the ice sheet to the north was completely impassable, so they did not come from the north. They came from somewhere else, by some other route, using some method of travel that our current models do not include. And the question that 23,000-year-old footprints leave behind, pressed into New Mexico soil by a human foot we will never identify, is the same question that has haunted every discovery in this video. Let us lay out what we actually know. In Oregon, human DNA dated to 14,300 years ago, possibly older, before the accepted timeline. In Washington, a 9,000-year-old skull with features matching no known American population. In Chile, a human settlement at 14,800 years ago, at the bottom of a continent that would require 20,000 years of prior migration to reach on foot. In California, a mastodon with deliberately fractured bones, dated to 130,000 years ago. In New Mexico, human footprints pressed into the earth 23,000 years ago, when the only known entry route into the continent was sealed under a glacier. Each of these discoveries was made by credentialed scientists. Each was published in peer-reviewed journals. Each was subjected to rigorous independent testing, and yet, none of them has fundamentally changed what is taught in schools. None of them has triggered a rewriting of the history books. None of them has produced the kind of global reckoning that discoveries of this magnitude should produce. Why? Part of the answer is institutional. Entire careers, entire museums, entire academic departments have been built on the existing model of human migration. Changing that model does not just require new evidence. It requires the willingness to dismantle decades of professional identity. Part of the answer is practical. Archaeology is slow. Dating is expensive. Sites are fragile. The process of verification takes years, sometimes decades. But part of the answer, and this is the part that no archaeologist will say on the record, is that the implications are simply too large, because if humans were in the Americas 23,000 years ago, or 130,000 years ago, then the story of human civilization, as we understand it, is incomplete in ways we have not yet begun to measure. There were people here, watching the same stars we watch, walking the same ground we walk, thinking thoughts we will never know, living and dying and leaving behind nothing but a footprint in white sand, a fragment of bone in a California highway cut, a trace of DNA in an Oregon cave. History is not a fixed document. It is an excavation, and we are still only at the surface.